Hi, in this video I'm going to show you 3 different ways to make fabric ball buttons. A very simple button, but one that is great for your medieval sleeves right the way through to bridal gowns. They can also be used as button molds for other types of buttons. So let's get started. I'm using a very fine wool, and this, as you can see, has a tendency to ravel at the edges. So in order to make this ball button, we're going to make a self-stuffed ball button. Now I'm going to be making it a little bit larger than you probably would want, just so that you can see it. I tried doing a smaller one and my fingers actually got in the way of filming. So I'm going to do this a little bit larger. Now I'm going to just trace around a circle, and then let's see, I'll trace around another one, which is where my stitch lines will be. I'm really just working this for the camera. Something as large as this will need additional stuffing. It can't be entirely self-stuffed at this size, but the little ones can be. But I think doing it this way, you'll be able to see the principle of how to make a ball button of this type. I have some sewing thread. I've knotted it, and I'm going to work a back stitch to start off, and then I'm going to work running stitches along that line. So as I said, really ideally you'd be making these very small if you're working them for medieval, for instance, sleeve buttons. They do need to be really quite tiny. But it just is not any good for filming. I don't think anybody would be able to see what I was doing. So I've ended with the thread on what is the outside or the right side. So if you have a fabric where that is a point, the right and wrong side, then do make sure that you do that. So I've just gathered it up a little bit. I'm going to fold this in towards this pouch that's starting. So all those raw edges are enclosed. And then draw up some more. And I'm going to use a stick to just get those in. And it's a sort of a blunt stick, so something like a knitting needle will work brilliantly. Now that's almost there, but it's not firm enough because of the size that it is. Now if you do that, then obviously all you need to do is add a little bit more scraps of the same is usually the best. So and I like to use smaller scraps because then you can sort of build it up. The thing about a ball button, it should be really as firm as you can make it, I think, and with as little lumps and bumps as you possibly can. Now that's not always easy, depending on the fabric that you use. Certainly with something as thin as this, or with a silk, the chances are you'll see a few bumps along the edge, but you can get quite a professional look. You just make sure that you take your time, stuff it well. Just got a bit of that excess stuffing sticking out, so we don't want that sticking out. And I'm pulling in as much as I can. Now I need to lock that stitch so it stays pulled in, so I'm just going to work across. And this is why I'm using a lighter thread, so that you can see what I've done. So there's a basic ball button. And do one more stitch because that feels like that might just start to, the gathering might come out. The next thing to do, I like to do, is sort of roll it around in my fingers to make it a little bit more bowl shaped, okay? And now we'll work a spiral wrap in the same way as we do with a flat covered button. So we'll work around the button. And if you take a stitch in a depression and pull, you can find that you can even out a lot of those gathers and make the button look really nice and round. Let's say with thin fabrics, you'll always have a few, but you can get rid of quite a lot of them just by working this spiral. So that's looking quite good. Squash it a little bit. We got a little bit of a bump. That's making it look less circular. And that's really what you have to do. Just sort of manipulate it as you go and squeeze it and make that stuffing do what you want it to do, not what it wants to do. And that'll help you get a much nicer bowl shape. You can also decorate these if you want something for a more modern look. You know, we're not just talking about historical ball buttons here. They make a great base if you want to. For instance, you could pop one of these inside a Yorkshire button to have something a little more firm than a normal stuffing. There you go, that's looking pretty good, I think. And so I'll just fasten that off. And with your thread, if you take it through and then knot it, pulling up, the end should sink in so you won't have a rough end of your thread. And then you can manipulate it again if you need to, but there is one method to make a ball button. So that one has used a self stuffed method. But if you have a thicker wool, so for instance something like this, and a thicker fabric entirely, you don't really, number one, you don't usually need to turn it under. It can be quite difficult to do that. But also the bulk and the actually using it is not always easy. So sometimes you don't want to have a seam allowance or a turn under at all. So again, I'll use this side where I have a little bit off. Now I'm going to make this one a little bit smaller. Save those bits. A couple of those bits from the end. And again, I will go ahead and use this green. You can just see that, I think. I'm using the thread double again. And I'm going to wax the thread. You don't always need to. It really just depends. But sometimes I just find it's a little bit easier when I'm doing sort of sewing. Now, I'm going to start just a little bit in. And again, work a back stitch and then a running stitch. You could draw another circle here if you wanted to, but we're not, it's not so crucial with something as thick as this. Again, I'm going to end with my needle on the right side and I'm going to pull in. I'm going to stuff this with some of this wool and then bring it up. And that's pretty tight. So I'm going to work a stitch across. And then here, my spiral stitching is going to catch a little bit above, so about where my wraps were, to try to just bring this in to flatten it out a little bit. Because with the thick wools, you want to encase it still, but folding it under will just take away from the shape of making a nice sort of ball button, because there will be so much bulk there on the fold, and that's really what you want to avoid. However, wool can also be manipulated further with a bit of steam and water and so on as well, so you can actually make some really nice firm ball buttons. A little bit of a kink there, hang on. There we go. And so you see I'm taking the thread over the raw end of the fabric. And then roll it around a little. It's giving it a nice shape. A little bit there that's still a little, could do with just being encased a little bit. And what you can't see, I don't think, is how firm this actually is. It's really nice and rock solid, which is what you want out of a ball button. If you're going to make a fabric ball button, it has to have a bit of substantial shape to it, otherwise it won't actually be much good as a button. So a little knot, take the thread through, pull up. That cut before the pull up happened. Scissors are just too sharp. And there you are. Another ball button, this time with a thicker wool. And the third method is one that, oops, I will also use the burgundy with. And this one is particularly nice if you are using like a silk or something. So again, I'll do this a little bit larger than you probably would for a ball button. And I will again use the green, nice bright green thread so that you can see it. Exactly the same, threading my needle up double, knotting the end. And I do think I will wax this as well. Now this time, I'm going to fold a little bit in. Start with a back stitch. And then with each subsequent stitch, I'm going to fold in. So this isn't the most time efficient version of a ball button, but it is nice if you're doing something, as I say, with silks or a satin. You're doing a few little ball buttons for a bride dress or something like that, a bridal gown. This is a nice way to do it so that all the ends are enclosed and encased. I'm taking small stitches as well, you can see. Really, with any fabric buttons, the smaller the stitch, the smaller the running stitch, the tidier the front of the button will be. That's just a general rule. So as I say, I will be making something that's bigger than you probably would for a ball button. So that is our initial pouch shape. Now this has to be stuffed. And again, if you can use scraps, then all the better. But if you can't, that's fine. Just remember that particularly with your finer fabrics, you don't want to be able to see through it and see something that's glaringly different. So it can help if you, I'll show you. See how I've folded that down. So if you're making a sort of ball shape with your stuffing, that will give a smoother finish inside. You won't get sort of shadows. So back to the trusty stick to just push that last bit in. And that's not too bad. So work a stitch across as with the others, just to hold those gathering stitches in initially, and then work around with the spiral. And helps to hold on to it. Oh, I got a kink, that's why. Yeah, just take that kink out. And so with the spiraling, as before, if you go into a depression of the gather and pull up a stitch, that will help to take that lump out that's been caused by the gather. I have another kink. There we go. My thread's quite twisted. Let me just... That's better. Untwist my thread. It helps. So in the depression of the gather, and each time that helps to pull out the bumps. The nice thing is you can actually see it happening as well as you work. As before, squish it a little bit, manipulate it a little bit. Obviously, if you're going to be working in white satin for a bridal gown, you want to be careful manipulating it too much. You don't want the oils from your fingers messing it up. If that's the case, and if it really needs some shaping, you can always squish it between cloth and your hands, you know, to help protect them. There we go. I think that's a pretty good shape. Not bad, not bad at all. So 3 ball buttons, 3 different ways. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that helped, and do please click subscribe and like, and it all really helps the channel out. I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.